David Haight arrived a few weeks later as our new mission president, and I spent the last 8 months working very closely with him, and he became my mentor for life. And a week before I went home from my mission, he said, "Let me tell you what I want you to do when you go home." And this has become what's ended up being the formula for success and happiness. Get up early, work hard, get your education. You got to find your oil, find where that's a J. Paul Getty statement, but we've incorporated it. So you can, number 5, make your mark. You got to be good at something. And those 5 steps, he said, I guarantee will help you it'll make you successful, but it won't guarantee happiness. Then do number 6 and you'll be happy, and that is give back or serve others, build a kingdom, whatever the word you want to use. We spend our life teaching that all over the world. I've never seen this kind of exception to it.
Welcome back to the Leading Saints podcast. Today I get to welcome on Jim Ritchie. How are you, Jim?
Good.
Awesome. Now, you have been on my list of people suggesting people I should interview for a while, and we're finally making it happen. And where does your story begin? Where's a good starting point?
Oh, man, that's got to go way back to when I was a year old. I got polio. So I was raised on a chicken farm and a feed mill and a motel and a paper out area. So my parents were very hardworking people, and I was only one of 2 children, the second of 2 kids, and got polio. So I had this bad leg. I was in the hospital for 5 months I don't remember any of that. But then when I was 2 years old, learning to speak, I stuttered very badly when I learned how to talk. And so I lived with these 2 handicaps, quote, even though my parents wouldn't let me feel sorry for myself. They kept me working 18 hours a day, even as a kid. But I had this inferior complex that I was going to fail in life because I couldn't be the quarterback on the football team, and I couldn't be the debate captain because I had these impediments. And so but I also, just to add to this and make a long story short, I think it ended up being one of my strengths because it forced me, because, my friends would kind of laugh at me a little bit because of my stuttering and my limping and so on. And I would feel bad about that, but I discovered if I would laugh with them, that I learned that I made a lot of friends. Even though I couldn't communicate very well and couldn't play the football game, I was voted the 7th grade class president and 8th grade student body president for junior high, and then the senior high I was a student body president for the school for Wasatch High as my last year in school. So even though I couldn't communicate the story, I discovered that my inadequacies gave me the courage to try to laugh it off and smile it off, and made a lot of friends in the process, to where I learned how to cope with that problem in life. So it kind of got me going, but it helped me discover that you can compensate, and sometimes we get compensated when we discover a weakness. Sometimes it can become our great strength. Yeah.
So there's a lot of leadership indicators in your character, even at a young age.
And my brother was the junior high student body president and the senior high student body president. I was 4 years behind him in the same building. So we kind of followed him too. He became a doctor, a cardiologist. And so it was kind of nice to have parents really hardworking and very popular in the community and hired a lot of kids. And so we worked hard, but we also learned to compensate and follow a big brother and mom and dad and some great friends that really helped me get through that era of life that I wonder if I'd ever be able to make it in life. So interesting time.
And then did you serve a mission as a young man?
Then I just about didn't serve a mission. Because of my inadequacies, I figured I'd be a lousy missionary. And so when I graduated from high school, I ran away to a Gentile school, the University of Utah.
Oh boy, we share that, but that's because BYU didn't want me. But.
And so I ran away to kind of hide from my bishop and my mom and dad. And
you didn't want the pressure?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, but fortunately, I came home a few weekends, and one time I came home and went to my pre-quorum class at church, and one of my best friends, the high school principal I'd worked with as the student body president, he was my pre-quorum advisor, When I walked in the door, he said he changed the lesson totally and taught a lesson on Doctrine and Covenants 82 and 10. I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say. If you do not what I say, you have no promise. On the way out of the class, he put his arm around me and said, Jim, do you know who that lesson was for? And I said, that was for me, wasn't it? And he said, yes. He said, I saw you walk the door, and I just was inspired to teach that lesson today. And he said, you have a problem, and you're trying to run away from it, and the Lord can't bless you. I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say. And he walked me right to the bishop's office and picked up the mission papers. And a few weeks later, I received a call to go to Scotland on my mission. And I don't know, without that lesson, I might not have gone. I look back on my life and realize that a few times in my life when a mentor stepped in and saved my direction, because I'll tell the story in a minute here, but I could still be in Heber City herding chickens right now, 70 years later, but without that lesson. Then I'll just keep going a minute, because I get to the old MTC, the old mission home in Salt Lake, downtown Salt Lake, and I was there for a week, and went to Logan to get her endowments. Salt Lake Temple was closed, and I had a dream one night, and I dreamed I was in Scotland knocking on doors, and this little old lady opened the door, and introduced myself in perfect English, which I couldn't have done in real life, and then it ended. The dream ended. So I get on the airplane, and one of the first few regular flights going to Europe in 1962, and land with my first mission president, Bernard Brockbank, who became a general authority eventually, and he asked me some yes or no questions. You don't stutter when you say yes or no. And so he had no idea that I had a problem. And he sends me out to Nebarton that night, and my new big 6'6" companion from Bountiful. We unpack my bags, and then we go knocking on doors. And he takes the first 20 doors, whatever, and without any success. And then he finally says to me, Elder Ritchie, this is your door. I don't need to knock. I just got to lay my arm on that door.
You're so nervous?
Because I'm so nervous. Anyway, the door opens, and there's this little lady in my dream. Now, I dreamed in the mission home. There she was, this little old lady standing there. And I went, and in my heart, I went, yahoo, man, the church is true. I mean, it's going to be, I, the Lord, am bound. I'm here on my mission. I'm going to have this great blessing happen. And I open my mouth to give this little memorized door approach about my friend and I couldn't say friend. Everything I could say was but friend. And finally, out of mercy, my companion took over and introduced us, and she had no interest in the church, closed the door. And I said at that point, this is going to fail. I'm going to fail as a missionary. I said, don't make me do that again. I'll pack the bags and you do the talking. I can't go home. I can't embarrass my folks and my brother. So I got to stay, and I've only got 729 more days to go. And so we go for 2 or 3 days. He does the talking, and 2 days after transfers were over, on a Thursday of that week, another transfer happens. Now, I've been a mission president, so I know how transfers work. But you don't transfer one day, and then 2 days later you do another transfer. He transferred into our zone a new zone leader who had been a Catholic priest in Newcastle, England.
Like before he converted.
His mission. and he had one of his parishioners had come to him with a Book of Mormon given to her by 2 sister missionaries in Newcastle, she asked her if she should read that book, and he said, no, it's of the devil. But he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll read it for you. And you come back in a week, and I'll tell you why you don't want to read that book. He read it once. He read it twice. He said the 3rd time through, he knew he was in trouble. Eventually joined the church, was disowned by his family, disowned by his church. And Bernard Brockbank sponsored him on a mission, brought him to Scotland. He'd been 18 months, one of the great communicators. He was the Jeff Holland of Scotland at that time, because he was just a great communicator. And could go anywhere. He could go anywhere in a mission to speak on invitation, where most of us were restricted to our zones. And he called up Saturday night, 2 days after he got there, we never met, had no idea I had a problem. and said, Elder Barlow, we're going to go to these 3 wards or branches tomorrow to speak, and I want to trade companions. I want to take Elder Ritchie with me. And so we drive into these 3 branches and wards the next day, and on the way, he says, by the way, you'll be given a talk today on faith. And I say, no, I don't do that. He said, yeah, you will.
You're the missionary that doesn't talk, right?
Yeah, no, you will, he said. And he made me stand up in front of that group and give this 5-minute terrible talk. I mean, I destroyed it. It was terrible. And then he gets up 35 minutes and dazzles the audience, and everybody lines up to join the church. And I'm overdoing this story just a little bit. And then he goes to the next meeting, and he said 5 minutes on repentance, 5 minutes on something else. And I suffer through the day. And then the next week he does the same thing. For the next 6 months, every day but fast day, he took me all over Scotland, making me give these 5-minute talks. Until one day, about halfway through that experience, I stood up and gave a little talk that I can still remember this little old man walking up to me in the aisle of this rented hall in Scotland and thanked me for what I'd said. The first time in my life, anybody but my mother had ever complimented me on what I'd said. And it changed my life. I mean, wow. It was like getting out of Liberty Jail. That's a lousy comparison by comparison, but for me it was an escape from a prison that I thought I was going to be trapped in my whole life. And went on. Yeah. David B. Haight arrived a few weeks later as our new mission president, and I spent the last 8 months working very closely with him, and it was just a change of life, and he became my mentor for life. And I'll just finish with this part with one. The week before I went home from my mission, we're on the River Clyde with the members on a preparation day, just on an outdoor excursion, and he comes up to the side of me on the edge of the boat and said, Jim, you're going home in a week. He said, let me tell you what I want you to do when you go home. And this has become what's ended up being the formula for success and happiness. We're teaching all over the world in this Launching Leaders course. Is the foundation of that was get up early, work hard, get your education. You got to find your oil, find where that's a J. Paul Getty statement, but we've incorporated it. Find your oil so you can, number 5, make your mark. You got to be good at something. You got to have your oil to do it, to get good at something. And those 5 steps, he said, I guarantee will help you it'll make you successful, but it won't guarantee happiness. He said, if you'll do those 5 things and get successful at something, then do number 6 and you'll be happy. And that is give back or serve others, build a kingdom, whatever the word you want to use. If you'll find your oil and make your mark in life and then give it away, then you'll find real happiness. And I can bear witness that's really true. We spend our life teaching that all over the world, and I've never seen this an exception to it.
Yeah, and that came from President Haight, Elder Haight, right?
Haight.
Wow. So I'm curious, working with David B. Haight, I've read his biography, just so inspiring, his journey and the type of man he was. If someday when I interview him in the eternities, what are some leadership principles that come to the surface?
He was such a successful man in everything. He was, of course, the Haight Hardware, his Palo Alto, and then he helped get the temple built, and he was stake president.
Yeah, he's in California, Palo Alto
California,
area.
California guy. So everything he did was just an example of how to excel and do something out of the ordinary and help build his own world of business, which his children took over and ran, and then used it to build the kingdom, get the temples built and organize and run in charge of that. And then, of course, move up to become one of the Quorum of the 12. And for him to end up being in Scotland, when I was just getting through my real hardship 6 months of trial, and then to have the next 18 months, I got to work with him. He changed the mission. He created 5, what he called 5 missions named after famous Scottish people. And called 5 mission presidents, 5 of us to be mission presidents.
Really?
I was Robert the Bruce, the Bruce mission president for over a fifth of the mission and for 6 months. And every Monday morning got to get in his office in Paisley and work with him and hear him and talk with him. And it just, life-changing experience. I just saw between my parents, who taught me how to work and how to take opportunities, and then to see him teach me how to lead. and how to be that. And it was just, and then when I came home, he became a mentor of mine. I'm sure many of my callings in life have been as a result of David Haight taking this limping, stuttering chicken farmer and trying to make something of his life, because he just would meet in his office once or twice a year, and I know that some of the callings we'll talk about were definitely from David Haight, but he really impacted my life.
Yeah.
Let me just finish by saying this point about that I use this now because in my patriarchal blessing, as a 15-year-old kid, Ralph Giles, my patriarch in my own ward, gave me this limping, stuttering chicken farmer kid. I wrote a limerick, and my only A in high school was a limerick. There once was a boy named Jim who was full of vigor and vim, who limped when he walked and stuttered when he talked. That little boy named Jim. That's my only A in high school. So but Ralph Giles gave me a patriarchal blessing, and here it was. I mean, this limping, stuttering chicken farmer kid, and he laid his hands on my head and told me that I would travel for the church, that I would have friends all over the world, and I would witness before many. Now, he had to go home that night and tell his wife, he said, "You can't believe what I just did to this kid." I mean, they'll never forgive me in Salt Lake for giving a patriarchal blessing to this kid that's probably never going to leave Dodge. And I told him he's going to be all over the world doing things, and friends all over the world, and he'll witness for many. And of course, 9 missions later, and having spent 25 years in the mission field full time with my wife, we got friends all over the world. We got an email list over 1,000 people that we talk to every week, and we've spoken in thousands of places all over the world, and it's just really a miracle. But to think that Heavenly Father knows us and knows what we could do and what we ought to do and what we're foreordained to do, and that He would tell me, this, again, limping, stuttering kid, that those things that I would be able to do, and then to send a Catholic priest to become a full-time missionary, and to send him in my zone and have me take the only kid he took around the mission and made me stand up and communicate. I mean, He knows who we are, and He does, and He'll fulfill every promised foreordained blessing in life if we'll just have the marrying trees of life, that high school principal, to give that lesson at the right time, and have me there to listen to it, without which I shudder to what might have happened in my life.
Yeah, it's powerful. So I'd love to dig into these nuances, going back to Elder Haight's leadership. So did he have zone leaders in the mission?
Yeah,
but did he call you mission presidents? Or?
He created 5 missions, under which then each of us had several zones.
Okay.
Every senior companion was a district leader. The moment he's called a senior companion, because he had a ward to work with, or a branch.
Oh, okay.
So we all had our own ward or branch, and that senior companion was in charge of all the missionaries, all the members of that ward, and then zone leader over several wards, and then the 5 mission leaders. In fact, as a mission president, I did the same thing. I was lucky enough to have John Carmack as my area president. They would never let me do the things I did if it had been for a guy who came along. In fact, let me tell you a story. We were in Virginia as mission president, and we're having our first mission tour, and John Carmack is my area president, we divided the mission into 3 regions, like President Haight had done. We had the Bluefield region, and we had the capital Richmond area, and the title. I can't remember the name of the ocean, the Norfolk area, and 3 regions. And so anyway, we took him to the first regional conference, and we had 2 assistants with us in the back seat, and we just left Richmond, I think, and we left two area assistants in that region. I had 8 assistants, 2 in each region, and 2 with us. Every month we'd have 2 come in, train them, they'd go in the region, and then 2 would go home, and 2 more would come in. So we had 8 assistants going all the time because of David Haight. And Elder Carmack, we got through at that first region conference, and he says, Jim leaned up, and I was driving, he said, "How do you feel about being out of conformity with the White Handbook in 8 areas?" And I could feel myself being released at the moment in time, and being sent home. And I said, oh yeah. And he said, for instance, and then he started naming them off and named the 8 assistants. He said, the White Handbook calls for 2, you got 8. And I said, David Haight. And he said, you got the White Handbook calls for zones and districts. You got regions, zones, and conferences. I said, David Haight. And on, everything. I blamed him for everything. And after he got through listing all of them, he said, you have yellow planters in the mission. You got Franklin planters in your deal. And I said, well, I was with Franklin for 5 years. And Hiram Smith came out and gave us all Franklin planters. And he said, when he finally got through, he said, okay. He said, listen. He said, your mission's on fire. He said, you're leading the whole area in baptisms. Everybody's doing a great job. Your missionaries are excited and loving it. He said, just do me one favor. He says, it says 2 weeks before you go home, make it look like a White Handbook mission. He said, don't make somebody come and inherit your style or your mission. He said, they'll feel bad. They won't know what to do. And make them look bad. He said, just make it look like a normal mission 2.5 years from now, will you?
Oh, that's awesome.
Anyway, that was
and this really came from that mentorship from Elder Haight of just saying, like, we're going to do leadership in a way that's inspiring or that's different.
Everything he did was to motivate and inspire. He said, give a kid a calling and then make him understand what that means, what he's got to do to live up to it. So we get the district leader quick, senior companion, your district leader, zone leader, regional rep, young mission president. I mean, in our mission, we had 2 a month, so we had 24 APs every year. And so over 70 of our missionaries, the Rick McGee's and the Doug Nielsen's of life were all assistants. It's 72 of them that otherwise they would have been probably 8 or 10 in the 3 years.
Yeah.
And because David Haight said, give a kid a position, tell him what it means to live up to it, and then they'll rise to the occasion. They'll become a leader.
Yeah. Yeah. And this dynamic's interesting. I even see it, recording this the day after conference, and Elder Karen, he mentions that when you're called to these positions, you sort of step back and reassess who you are. Yeah. And that's the power of leadership. And so, obviously there's only 12 spots for apostles, but we can still have these dynamics happen as we invite people into leadership roles by giving them a title, responsibility, and then they find a different part of them at their soul.
Think about that. Think about the fact that I was as a bishop for only 3 years before David Haight suggested that I leave Hebrew and get out of town and go build a church somewhere. Had 26 businesses at the time, and bishop in the ward and the chamber of commerce president, and I went to see him. And I said, and then I remembered giving back, helping building the kingdom, helping others, and I went to see him, and I said, I've got this urge to volunteer to be a seminary teacher and take my kids on a mission. I had 7 kids at the time. Said, I got all these businesses and I'm a bishop and so on. He said, remember the formula? Remember the formula? And I said, yes, that's why we're thinking about it. He says, follow your impression, follow your spirit. And so we volunteered to go teach the seminary, to be a seminary teacher somewhere out of Utah. And they didn't have a program then. They didn't have a volunteer program for CES.
So like stakes weren't calling seminary teachers back then.
So anyway, they had to hire me. I had to get hired. And I had to go through this training program. And luckily I had my bachelor's degree. I had to have a bachelor's degree at least. And then they hired me to go to California and take my kids. I said, I'm only going for 9 months. I can't. This is just a mini mission to me. So I don't care about the money at all. And I got to get back to my business stuff and so on. And they said, well, okay, but we'll send you to California. So I opened the first day seminary program in California with my 7 kids. We liked it so much we stayed for another year. And then by that time I stake president. And then we stayed down for another 5 years. And then David Haight, I'm sure, intervened at that point, because I was only bishop for 3 and stake president for 5, which is usually 5 and 10. And then we're called as mission president to go back to Virginia at that point. So we're in Simi Valley for 8 years on that mini mission. It was going to be 9 months, spending full time as stake president and institute director. Built an institute program. We had 2 kids start at Moore Park in an old farmhouse. Ended up with 350 kids at that institute, biggest in the church outside of Utah, and an old farmhouse. And because of that, I'm adding on to this forever, but because of that 350 kids in an old farmhouse, the commissioner of education heard about it in Salt Lake, and he flew to California to come and see if it really was happening in this old farmhouse, 350 kids. And he came out and spoke at a devotional, and his name was Stan Peterson. And he later, a few years later, ended up calling me on the phone and saying, we just had our area director for CES, we just called into the quorum of 70 in Africa. Would you go to Africa for us and for a short period of time, and 1 to 3 years, and be the area director, the only non-paid area director in the church? And I went and told my wife I just got invited to go to Africa. And she was, she couldn't believe it. I mean, she had the visualization of the canister, on the fire underneath, and the natives going around the outside. And so it was, but we went. But it was Stan Peterson. Had we not been to California and helped build that institute, Stan Peterson never would have come and found out who we were. And because of that, we got to go to Africa, and then Africa to West Africa as the MTC president. Then from there to BYU-Hawaii as the entrepreneurship director for 3 years in Hawaii. And then the young adult later in Washington, D.C. South Mission. So several of our missions to New Zealand for 2 years as well in between that were all because of, Marion Tree and the high priest and the priest quorum advisor and then the patriarch giving that blessing and now Stan Peterson, the commissioner of education. Any one of those would have not met him, that would have changed our whole life.
Right. Yeah.
And it all happened because the David Haight said, give back, serve others, build the kingdom.
Yeah, that's powerful. And all this, the sort of a core principle I'm recognizing is mentorship. Yeah. And I've talked to some of your missionaries that I'm good friends with, and they could come back to this, that they see you as a great mentor. So if there's church leaders out there striving to be a better mentor, what advice would you give them to do that effectively?
Well, I'd have them start with Moses. Moses was an 80-year-old man herding sheep in San Pete County. I use that as a joke because I don't know where he was, but I just got back from San Pete County.
But it probably looked like that, right?
It looked like that. But he was his father-in-law Jethro's sheep herder for the last 30 years. But finally, for some reason, at my age, he went up the mountain, made the trek up the mountain, difficult trek for an old man. And when he did, God waited for him to come. He could have done this 30 years before, but he waited for Moses to make the decision. He wanted to find out more and come to the mountain, come to Scotland or come to the mountain. And when he did, then God says, okay, welcome, Moses, sit down a minute. I got to show you a home video. And they sit down and watch this home video of the creation story. And all the time they're watching it together, Moses is saying, wonder why he's showing me this video, is he trying to impress me with what he's done with his life? And of course, that's insanity. And so finally he recognizes the fact that he's standing next to God, watching a video of what he's done with his life. And it finally dawns on him, he's saying to me, Moses, you can do more than being a sheep herder. I've waited 30 years for you to come, because you have incredible opportunity, because I made you to be like me. I'm your mentor. I'm now would you use what you have and go do something with it? And he comes off the mountain. Satan comes right after him, because he says he didn't want to have Moses realize that he was a leader, and he wanted to be a sheep herder. And finally, and Moses 7 times said to him, get out of my life now. I don't want you anymore. He's okay yesterday. I didn't understand all this, but now I know who I am. And then when he finally gets rid of Satan, Satan departs. Then God comes back to him and says, now I know I can use you. You've been tested, you've been tried, and now you've said, okay, now go to Egypt, go to Scotland, go to Simi Valley, go to Washington, D.C., go to New Zealand, go to Hawaii, go to California. Because the Lord can use you somewhere. He just develop your strengths as all you can and go try, and he'll help you fill up that role and position, and you'll discover the joy of mentorship and leadership And in fact, I'll go back to kind of where I started. I kind of pushed the church a little to say, why don't you call bishops at 3 years instead of 5? And my point was, I got a few of when I was stake president, I got a few early calls, and because I saw so many people in every one of those wards, whose family and person would have thrived and excelled if they'd have had the chance to be a bishop. Mm-hmm. And so I was really pushing for 3-year bishops and 5-year stake presidents, because I said, man, there's so many people that they thrive when they grow when the opportunity comes. And you don't need to be a bishop and a stake president to serve. You know, this mentorship and this, you know, what do they call it when you go fellowshipping, ministering. So you can be a bishop as a junior companion in the church, because you just can go out and help people, minister and lift people, save lives and lift people's lives. But it's also really a thrill when you get a chance to take your family through a bishopric role and a high council role and a stake president role or counselor or whatever.
Yeah.
Mission president, with MTC president. Man, what a great experience that was in Ghana. I mean, every one of those were just David Haight called up opportunities that changed our life.
Yeah. So to take me back to, you come up from your mission, you sort of you spent your time as an entrepreneur. Is that safe to say?
I come home my mission. I went to BYU now that I could join the church. And so I go to BYU and I tell this story. It didn't happen this way, but there's a story by it. I realized that I had the formula and I wanted to get on to life. And so I needed a woman to do that, a wife. And so I said, I started knocking on girls' dorm doors, and there's always, I knew behind every door there was 6 to 8 beautiful women there. And they'd open the door and I'd say, hi, my name is Jim Ritchie and I'm from Heber City and I need a woman. And they'd look at me and they'd say, why would we want to date you? You know, you're not very handsome. You got a bad leg. Used to stutter, chicken farmer's kid. Why'd we date you? And I said, you know, that hurts. That really hurts that you say that, but they're all true. But I said, you know what? But I have the formula. And I'm going to make it in life, because I've been promised by a future apostle that if I'll live these 6 steps, I'll be successful. But I need a woman to help me do that. Now, it didn't happen that way, and my wife hates the story. But we finally found this beautiful Dixie chick from St. George. It was a Dixie Queen, and she was in the ward, and we started dating and got engaged and married, and 8 kids later, and 41 grandkids, and 21 great grandkids, and 90 of us now in the family. And right now, all but one adopted granddaughter. She's not doing well in the church, but everybody else is. All 90 of us were being church every week of some sort. We got 2 or 3 that are struggling a little bit with life, but they're still going to church, and they're going to make it. They're going to be okay. And it's so I came home, and then we graduate from BYU, the 2 of us, and then we go start law school, which didn't work out. I spent a year in graduate school, but we dropped out of there and went back to taught school for a year in high school, Wasatch High, while I built my first business. Got an SBA loan and built a new modern feed mill in Heber Valley. And from there, we went on from there. I ended up with a Chevrolet dealership and several restaurants and motels from St. George to Rexburg. And we ended up with 26 businesses. And then that's when at age 35, we got the urge to say, let's go take these kids on a mini mission.
That's cool. Now, this role as bishop during that time, was that really your first formal leadership role since your mission?
Yeah, after my mission, I was called to be. I was the first stake executive secretary in the church. I think they come out with stake executive secretaries, and Harold Call was the stake president, and he called me to be the first. He didn't know how to use me. I didn't know how to use me. We learned together how to be an executive secretary, and I was there for a year, and then Bishop Bessendorfer was the bishop of my ward. He called me to be a counselor, and so I was a counselor to Bishop Bessendorfer, and then for 2 years, and then he built a home in Charleston where his hometown was, and we knew he was going to move that week, and we're going to be released, and I got called to go in to see the stake president. Now, this is a prideful story. He get called to go in. I'm the counselor. I got all these Chevrolet leadership, and I'm a businessman, and I'm only 26 or 7 years old, but I'm thinking I'm quite cool. And so I assumed to bring my wife and put my best suit on, and so I'm assuming I'm going to be called to be the bishop to replace Bishop Bestendorfer. So I go in and meet with the stake president, Bob Clyde, and he said, we're going to be releasing you guys this weekend. And I remember humbly shaking my head and saying, well, it's going to be hard to replace Bishop Bestendorfer. He's a great one. It's going to be really hard to do that. And he said, yes, he said, and the Lord has called Harvey Horner to be the new bishop. And he's asked that you be his counselor. and Harvey's younger than I was, and he was a school teacher. And I thought, how could he be wrong on this call? Anyway, so I served with Harvey, and it takes me a while to really catch on because I'm looking for the reasons why he was called and I was supposed to be. And finally, one night, in the middle of the night, one Saturday night, I got a dream as vivid as can be and it just said that, Jim, Harvey Horner's not on trial here. You are. And the next day I went to Harvey and told him, I said, I've been kind of a mediocre counselor, but I think I can be a good one. If you ought to can me, but if you don't, I think I can be a good counselor. And so I finished off another year, and then we built a home in Daniels and met the new bishop, and we moved there, and he called me to be a scoutmaster, which was the furthest thing from my mind as a scoutmaster. I'm not an outdoor guy at all, but I did it. 5 months later, I was called to be the bishop. So I know if I'd have failed as that counselor for Harvey Horner, if I'd have failed as that scoutmaster, my whole life would have been different.
Interesting.
The bishop then turned into stake president, and several region jobs in California, and then mission president and so on.
So if you go back in time and mentor yourself during those early leadership years as a young bishop, I mean, what comes to mind? It's being a David Haight, trying to be a David Haight and trying to follow his footsteps and trying to touch lives and realize that, in Scotland, I'll tell you one quick story and I'll tell you how it fit. He decided to have what he called a feat of faith, a 40-day program where he wanted the missionaries to live perfect lives, all of us, perfect. Gave us a calendar, told us exactly what to do, 6:30 to 9:30 at night, 10:30 at night, what to do all day long, what to do, what to study, every day memorizing the scripture on faith. If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. That was the first deal. And he said, I promise you something, that we're going to have a miracle happen in Scotland. But you got to earn it. You got to believe and do it. You got to do it. You got to live this perfect life. And so we all committed to do it. And they said, we're going to send a letter, a calendar, a tribute pledge to David O. Mackay, the church leader, on his 91st birthday. We're going to baptize at least 182 people, 2 times his birthday. And if you baptize in the 6-week period, you can sign the scroll. It'll go to Scotland. It'll go to Salt Lake to David Haight, to David O. Mackay, who's Scottish. And so we have 5 weeks of mediocre work. And by that was just right after the time they'd cut off the kiddie dip program. You couldn't baptize unattached kids anymore. So the whole Western European missions had gone south dramatically. David Haight said, we can still baptize just so many people, but not have to baptize baseball kids. Mm-hmm. And 5 weeks was normal. The last week of that mission, of that 40-day period, we not only baptized more people than any other mission, we baptized more people than all the Western European missions combined. Wow. It was an incredible experience, one I'll never forget. We all got, every mission companion but one got to sign the scroll. But I never forgot the fact that leaders cause miracles to happen. Leaders cause miracles to happen. And David Haight showed me how to do that. And so everything I did, I mean, in Daniels, we got all the young women leaders and the young men leaders, and we'd only had one kid go to youth conference a year before we got there. And we said, let's do something big. And the council got excited, and they said, let's send every kid. We had 62 kids in our ward, the young kids.
next year, let's have everybody go to the youth conference, and let's raise enough money this winter to do it. And the young women and young men got together, and they worked hard in the bishopric. And next year, we had 62 kids on the bus, and one got off because her boyfriend came and got her off the bus. But 61 out of 62 went from 1 to 61 in a year. And the kids called themselves the biggest and the best. They were from this little rural town of Daniels where nobody ever excels. And all of a sudden, we became the biggest in the state. And we go to California, and we're stake president. And after been there a few months, I said to the guy, I said, what if we did something? What if we created Zion in the stake? And what if we did a feat of faith? They said, what are you talking about? I said, why don't we come up with a calendar and have all the members give a calendar and outline their day and what to do, and read the Book of Mormon out loud as a family in 40 days, and have a missionary experience and temple experience and the whole bit. And they said, that's a pretty good idea. And I gave them a copy of the calendar. And then I said, you know what, guys, they thought I was bright and genius. And I said, we're copying every bit of this. We didn't do a thing of this myself. And they all liked it. And we got excited. We started getting the wards to get excited about starting off this program. We didn't tell them what it was. We said, let's start off with a temple experience. Let's start off with a temple experience in the LA temple. And then the next night we'll meet you all and tell you what we want you to do. And so we built it up for several months. And the night of the temple nights, November 7th, 1982 or 3, I can't remember now, they started coming to the temple for the temple. I called the temple president and told him we're going to have a session come and want to have a big deal. And he said, President, we have stake temple nights every night. Just bring your people. Come on down. It'll be okay. I said, yeah, but we're all coming. He said, we've heard that before. And so anyway, we all started coming. We had a chapel session first, and they all kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. And before we were through, that night we had 747 members of our stake come to the temple that night. We were 3 o'clock the next morning.
And which temple is this again?
In Los Angeles,
okay.
LA. We were 3 o'clock the next morning getting everybody through the temple. They stayed up all night getting this done. But it was only 27 people who could have who had to recommend didn't come at 11 wards.
Mm-hmm. And
we found out the next day that those 27, everyone were even dying, having babies, or deathly ill. Not one single person who had to recommend, and over 100 people got to recommend to get ready for it, came to the temple that night. And they still, anytime I meet anybody that was there that night, and we've been gone there for 35 years, they talk about that temple night of being in the temple in LA.
That's cool.
And then we finished the 40-day program with another temple. 707 came back. Temple was ready for us the second time. We had 707 come back and finished that after having read. We were going to create Zion. We didn't get it done. We weren't translated, but we came close. We came close because we really did have this goal of having a David Haight miracle happen in our stake. And it's still today, I still get chicken skin just telling the story of what it was like to live in that stake when people were really trying to become a Zion people.
Mm-hmm. So, and as a leader, you're rallying them around this movement, really, of what we're doing. And
the three of us would go to a ward. So we go to 2 or 3 wards every Sunday. The 3 stake presidency members, we'd have at least 5 minutes in every ward in the stake before and during a 40-day period, where we would be talking about creating the Zion stake and be the first one since Enoch to. And again, we didn't make it. Yeah, but we came close.
Or maybe you're the only one they left behind. Everybody else was translated. No. Now, and I'm just curious, like in that dynamic, like how do you? Was it difficult to maybe get your bishops on board with this? Or
it wasn't really. It was interesting. They were easily excited and motivated, and they got behind it, and they were all with it. We had 11 awards at the time. There are only 5 right now in Simi Valley. California's had a drain of the members all come to Utah and Idaho.
That's right.
But we had those 11 units, and they were all really pumped about what they were trying to do. It's interesting. We kind of debated why we didn't quite finish it off. And then one of my counselors and I went to this general conference in April after we'd done that in November, December. And we sat in the very back row of the old tabernacle. And I discovered that to get President Kimball cool up on that stage a mile away, they had to have an air conditioning unit, which they didn't have when they built it. But I know where they put it. They put it right back here behind, and it comes out of the wall right there. And if it comes at 80 miles an hour, they can get down to President Kimball. And we're sitting right in the back row, right in front of it, freezing to death, literally believing we're going to die in the spot there. We're going to be frozen to death at that air conditioning. But it made us, and I remember jokingly saying I wrote notes to my wife and put in my pocket, so when they found the body, they'd find my last words were about my wife and the kids. But we joke about that, but we decided, and then they asked me, what did you learn in the conference? I said, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know who spoke. I just trying to survive, just to live through it. But then it got us back to the Zion, one heart, one mind, dwelling in righteousness and no poor. We had focused on one heart, one mind, dwelling in righteousness for the 40 days, had not worked on the temporal side. And that experience of being freezing to death convinced us that the temporal side is as important as the other. When Enoch did it, he worked on all four. We'd spent working on all three of them. So if we'd had time, we'd have worked on that, but then we're called to go to Virginia, so we didn't have time to work on the other. But it was just a great learning experience of realizing that you gotta take them temporally and spiritually if we're going to create that place.
So were you stake president when the call came to be a mission president?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the story behind that?
Well, it's been 5 years, and all of a sudden I get a call one family night from President Monson. Actually, we'd been called, we flew to Northern California to meet with Elder Oaks, just in the interview. No idea what it was for.
And he just happened to be in town? Or?
He was in Oakland, and we flew from LA to Oakland to meet with him as for an interview. No idea why. He just interviewed us. And then 2 weeks later, we got a phone call on a family night, right in the middle of family lesson, from President Monson.
Which was out of the ordinary,
he was a
even
counselor
for you.
at the time, a counselor, and called us to be mission president. And so we only got to spend 5 years as stake president.
Yeah. And did he have a call your location where you're going at that point?
He just said it would be English speaking, and we'd know in a few weeks where it was going to be.
Were you praying for Scotland?
I don't know where I was praying for. Interesting, we had 8 kids at the time, and they're all still, the oldest one's a senior in high school. And so that was the complication to the church as well, because where do you have a mission home that can house 10 people? And so there's only 2 or 3 missions in the church that would have worked. Washington, D.C., one of them was one, and Roanoke was the other one. And we got to go to Roanoke, thankfully, and it was just perfect for us. We created Southern Virginia University during the time, just right after we were there, and helped Glade Knight does on the board of trustees of that, with the first ground, and Glade Knight developed that, and I got to help, and it was just a fun time. We had just incredible growth. We went from a few hundred baptisms to the second and third year. We had over 1,000.
And how do you walk into that role? Like, where do you start as a mission president?
And again, you remember what David did. David, what did President Haight do? How did he do it? And we just started meeting with the stake presidents every month. We met with all 9 stake presidents every month, and the stake presidency and the mission leaders, and we started calling these missionaries into where they be as district senior companion. They became district leaders, working with the ward. And so we just started trying to do those leadership things again that Elder Haight had done. And it worked. And then meet with the stake presidents every month. We lived in Roanoke, which like living in St. George, and your missionaries in Salt Lake. Our mission was 11 hours across. We go from Outer Banks of North Carolina to West Virginia. And so we had a lodge mission. Now there's 4 missions now in that same area. But we just started meeting with the leaders, and we interviewed every missionary every month. Had 250 missionaries, and we had transfers in every month, not every 6 weeks like they are now. So we were spend as many nights in a hotel or a member's home as we did in Roanoke, leaving 8 kids back in Roanoke but Carolyn's mom and dad come out on a mission and lived in the mission home with us, and mission
Cool.
office couple, and so they were there when we weren't there and helping raise those kids. And I got the kids close to those parents, which they didn't really know her parents very well, because we lived in Heber, they lived in St. George. But that was fun. And our oldest daughter had graduated from high school. When we left, she came out. She went to BYU for a year. She got a mission call, and she was asked, "Do you want to go be assigned or go back to your parents' mission?" Because we still had 18 months left of our mission, and she's asked to come to our mission. So
oh, really? Wow.
our oldest daughter got to serve with us. We put her in the worst areas. We didn't want anybody to think we had shown favoritism. She became our best missionary. And
Wow.
great experience.
Was that common back then? Or, I mean,
Pardon?
I guess, was that a common thing? But maybe there weren't a lot of mission presence
I'm not sure about
with
that.
21-year-old daughter.
And she got to go a year early besides,
Oh, okay.
Because of being mission presence kid. In fact, we had our three oldest were girls. And in those days, girls, most of them didn't go on missions. It was kind of an odd exception. They had to be 21, and the whole bit. But when we got to Virginia and they got to go out every night and work with the sister missionaries, they all got the spirit of it. And of course, Marisa came to serve with us. Michelle she went to BYU, and then she got to go early too. And so we only had 6 months left. So she was assigned and went to Brazil. Wendy had to wait her full term, but she went to Spain. And then our boys all went on missions. And so I don't think our girls would have gone had we not had that experience of working with the sister missionaries. And they all became great. All 8 of our kids went on missions. It was fun.
Yeah. Now, the nature of missions is you have missionaries coming and going all the time. So as a new missionary came into the mission, how do you get them in the culture of the mission so that they don't, they don't drag the energetic culture behind?
We would get them in, and we'd spend a couple of days with them to start with. They'd live right in we had a big mission home. It's now been sold, made into a hotel.
Oh, wow.
But we had room to have 25 missionaries besides our family, and the mission couple living in the mission homes, and the office was right there. So it was perfect for us.
It was like the White House. That's right. You lived there and you worked there.
Our kids got to watch the missionaries. Our little kids, little Jonathan, some weren't even at school yet. Jonathan, he started school in Virginia, and they were all grade school, high school, and missions, and so they got to mingle with the missionaries, and the assistants were there every day till we go on the trips and with them and so on. And so it was just, the missionaries would come in and we'd bring in the kids going home for their going home time. Then we'd bring in all the zone leaders and regional mission assistants to have a training session that weekend. And then they'd be there to help train the new missionaries. So they'd spend 2 days with these 8 assistants and these 15 zone leaders. They were the trainers that got them going. So they got them indoctrinated very quickly. And so they moved right into their roles. It was the natural for them to kind of move into that spirit of the Roanoke, Virginia mission. Yeah. And then to watch the numbers go up, it was really fun to see that dramatically go up.
As far as your wife's role in that, how did that develop? Or
she one weekend served and cooked and prepared 400 meals one weekend for adult, for the senior couple conference, zone leaders conference, new mission transfers, old missionaries going home. So when she wasn't on the road with me, as we were doing the mission tour every month, when she was home, she was of course raising 8 kids, right, and still making sure everything. We didn't have maid service in those days. Today, our daughter in Denver, they have someone come and do cleaning, and they have some help with cooking and so on. My wife and her mother and our children did all of that for all these missionaries, and she did a great job. She was really, really, really good at taking everything, making the home still work and the family still work. So,
what advice do you have for leaders who maybe have younger families, or they want to have a strong mentorship or influence on their children while also stepping up in these roles? Like, how do you strike a balance there?
Oh, it just be where you're supposed to be, I guess, is the key. You just show up, be there. If you're called to be the primary teacher, which I've never had the chance to be, just be the best primary teacher going, and just love those kids and just do it, because the Lord's watching, and he's waiting for you to step up and say, hey, and then whatever it is, ministering, counselors, there's just so many places to serve, and the joy of what you feel, it's it makes you just want to do more. Our missions, when we called to go to New Zealand, our first CES real mission, and we got to the Waikato University, the Hamilton, the Waikato University, the Hillcrest Institute. We had 200 kids. It was the first building built as an institute building outside the United States, in place at the time, and we got to go there. And it was the Going Jesse. They had 200 kids going to the institute, and but you know what we'd learned in California about working with the priesthood, having them own the leadership, own the stuff. We started doing the same thing. We quickly got to the stake presidents and presidencies, and identified we had 2,000 young adults in those 7 stakes, whatever it was, and we only had 200 coming to institute. So I said, we've got a lot of work to do, and we're going to be here at 6:30 in the morning until 9:30 at night, which means we can't go knock on their doors, we can't go find them. But if you guys want them to institute, want them to go on missions and be married in the temple, I think we can make that happen if we can get them in the institute. But we can't do it if we don't have them there. And so they got behind us, and they called the young adult reps and senior young adult reps in every ward, and we grew that program with their help, with their leadership. We grew that from 200 to 700 kids. We had 700 kids in the institute in Hillcrest before we left in 2 years, and it was just really fun to watch that happen. And I'm sure that's the reason why we got to go to Africa, because the church, Stan Peterson, saw that happen in Simi Valley and then in Hillcrest Institute, and realized that there's a way to recruit and build the program, and it really relies on getting the priesthood to own it. If you can get the stake presidencies to own the program, they own the kids, and there's always this philosophy, you got to leave the priesthood alone. They got a lot of work to do, they're running the youth and all that. Well, the young adults are their program too. They're their youth as well. And everywhere we went in Africa, we went to Africa, spent 2 years, and doubled everywhere we went. The numbers doubled when we got the priesthood to buy the fact that these kids are your kids, and if you want them trained in the institute program, you got to deliver them. And we think we got the kind of teachers that can keep them if you can deliver them.
Yeah, and this is a common dynamic that comes up. We get emails about, is this concept of buy-in and getting people sort of on the same bus as you, right? Yeah. That people don't mind leading, but it's like, what do I do with all these people who don't necessarily want to come with us on this journey you're doing? So, any advice as far as stimulating buy-in or getting people all on board?
It's amazing. Success begets success when they feel the joy of watching their numbers increase, watching their young adult wards be created. We created the first young adult ward in the church in Simi Valley. They had branches at the universities, but they didn't have a young adult ward. And they turned us down 3 times before we finally got permission to build the first young adult ward in Simi Valley in the church. And then we went from X to 100 missionaries at the time, serving out of our stake, serving full-time missions. I mean, it was incredible. And that just watching that happen and being a part of it, being the bishops and bishoprics and the other ward that were feeding the young adults into that young adult ward, and then watching those great dynamic bishops get them on missions and get our number from 50 to over 100. It's compensation enough. You love being involved in something that works. I've been out of the Daniel Ward since 1978. That's 46 years ago, and every kid that was in that program that I see around to a wedding or reception or something, they'll all come up to me and they'll say, "We were part of the biggest and the best." They coined the phrase themselves, but it was just part of something big.
Yeah.
And every time we got a Simi Valley person we meet, they'll comment about the temple night they went to and what a spirit that was there and how they came close to creating Zion. And if you can generate something, a program or something that gets them engaged and involved emotionally and spiritually, then it's self-perpetuating. everybody gets behind it. They all want to be part of it.
Yeah. And a large part of that you mentioned is just like you sort of getting this momentum of success, right? Just a little success, and then that sort of builds, and that's inspiring to people feel like we're part of the biggest and best, or whatever it was, right?
Back to David Haight again, to meet every Monday morning in his office and have the 5 of us report our numbers for the week. Every one of us wanted to have the most numbers. We wanted to be David Haight's all-star for the week. And it wasn't. I don't remember it being really competitive or where we were trying to compete with each other, but we just wanted to perform. We wanted to make him look good. We wanted our missionaries to look good, and we'd count up the number of the 5 regions of the baptism for the week, and it was just a thrill to belong to something that was growing and dynamic, and you're being led by such a leader, and you just wanted to be like it. You wanted to someday try my wings. I wanted someday, if I can ever do what he did in some way. And leadership is catchy, it's self-perpetuating, and if it's guided by something that works and is building the kingdom, so you can see results, there's nothing like it. Like you said, here's success, but here's happiness. When you use this success to give it away and help others become successful. In fact, he told me one day in his office, he said, and this is back when $1 million home wasn't a starter
right.
home. But he said, Jim, he said, there's nothing wrong with having $1 million home. But he said, if you do, be sure your neighbors have one too. If you can help your neighbors get one too, then it's okay to have your own. But make sure they got one too.
Yeah.
What a great principle.
Nice. Now, one of your missionaries told me about this dynamic you were good at of giving, like with this buy-in of giving autonomy to the leaders around the mission, that you're not just sending down marching orders from the mission home or mission office and away they go. And then maybe some interpret that differently. Does that ring a bell? Or
yeah. But it was fun watching the Nelsons and the rest of you mentioned that they really did get the spirit of it, and they did it because they wanted to do it and they felt the joy of it. It wasn't because they were being forced or mandated. I hope that none of them ever felt that. I will say the first week we got there, we trailed toward the mission, and we tried to explain what we wanted the missionaries to become. They wanted to become Zion missionaries. And we tried to describe what that was. And we finally wrote it in a paper. The first one of the iron rods I wrote, we called it No Rules from Roanoke. And we had the 3 kinds, the sloth missionary, the obedient missionary, and the Zion missionary. And we try to describe those. The sloth really has no interest in anything mission-wise. The obedience, the kids that are doing a good job, they live their mission rules, they're doing everything. But the ones you really want is the Zion missionary who's doing it for the right reason, because they really want to become something. They want to become like God. They want to become a great leader.
You don't necessarily need to prescribe rules for them, but
and they don't live by rules. They live by His rules. I can't mandate a Zion missionary. I can mandate you to be obedient. And that's so. But I don't want you to be obedient because I want you to be. I want you to be obedient. I want you to be one like He wants you to be. So anyway, I wrote it up. I had this written up, and we went around the mission, explained it. And one of the missionaries from California, he went home that day and called his mother on the phone, which we didn't do in those days, only on Easter and Christmas. But he called his mother and he said, "Mother, you can't believe this new mission president." He said, "He has no rules." He has no rules. And she lived next door. She lived next door. The next door neighbor was the mission president at our mission, and he's general authority, and general authority, 70s quorum, and he'd been the mission president, and his daughter was living next door, so his daughter called her dad
and told on you
and said, "Dad, you can't believe what the new mission president that took your place 3 times ago, that he took your place." And he said he hadn't got any rules. And he said to her, "I'm happy going out to Roanoke to be speaking at a Boy Scout retreatment in Northern Virginia next week. I'll stop in and visit." So this picture's on the wall.
All the other mission
presidents in a minute. And And so anyway, the stake president picks him up and brings him to the mission home, and we visit from him. And he says, "Could we go in my office and visit?" And I said, he said he wanted to go in his office, and I thought it was my office. And so anyway, we go in his office, which is, I thought, my office, and we visit. He said, "Tell me your theory on how you're going to work trying to train your missionaries." And I said, "Well, hey, just to read what I've written is kind of how my theory is. I'm trying to create this Zion mission and Zion missionaries." And he read that, and then he started to laugh. And he said, "If you can do that," he said, "you'll be the first person in the history of the church to ever pull this off." He said, but he said, "Let me tell you how at least one of your missionaries got it."
He told you the story.
Then he explained how this missionary had called it. He said, "So you maybe ought to do one more round of explanation before you turn them loose."
That's great.
Anyway, it was a great experience.
Any other story?
He became a great friend. He became. He even sealed one of our children after we got home. Anyway, great
cool
guy.
Anything else from those mission years, serving as a mission president, that we need to make sure we mention?
It's just been an extremely fun, exciting time and just so blessed to know that what if I hadn't been to that priest quorum class that day? What if I hadn't got Scotland? What if I'd never met David Haight? What if I'd never heard the formula? Just on and on, the little mentoring experiences that if I'd have been there, I would have, this Catholic priest, Heavenly Father had one prepared, but I had to be in the bar in Scotland to get it. If I'd have been there, it would have been wasted for me.
Wow.
And so I just teach the value of mentorships and also being where you're supposed to be, because you're going to run into somebody who's going to change your life if you can just be at that spot.
Yeah. So you come from your mission, and generally speaking, you were a young mission president, right? And you really had more than half your life to go at that point, right?
Yeah, we were quite young. That's 86, so we were 43 when they got this.
So what was your plan as you come home? What were you going to do with your life?
Well, and I came home and I immediately got before that, before that, 89 to 94. Yeah, that's right. After we come home, and then I was called to be regional rep, and I also Hiram Smith invited me to come help him build the Franklin company.
And he worked for Franklin Covey.
Yeah, he was he started Franklin, and
this isn't a vision of the Hiram Smith.
Years later, they bought Franklin, they bought Covey, but he asked me to help him start it, and the 11 of us really got the Franklin Quest company going, and I got to be the charge of sales and training for the company. And that was 89, 92, we went public. In 94, we were $1 billion company, training 6 million corporate executives a year.
Wow.
So I learned in that 5-year block of time, the only time I worked outside my entrepreneurship, only time I worked in the corporate America was that one experience. But I had a great experience, and it was being in charge of sales and training. I discovered that most training doesn't work. Most training doesn't empower. Most training educates, but if you don't educate and empower, you're wasting your time. If you don't alter behavior, if you don't change behavior, every time you teach a class, launching leaders, we always say, will you live this principle? And then I promise, if you will, Heavenly Father wants you doing a little work, and I know from experience that it'll work. And so when you walk out that door, will you go do this? And if you do, we promise you that you'll be more successful and happier. And that's what Launching Leaders is. That's what Steve Hitz has helped create is the company of Launching Leaders, which is a training program that really does work.
Yeah. And we've done several episodes, and we'll link to those so that people can check it out, because it's phenomenal. I love the book and everything that's happening there. So did you feel like, I guess this may be reflective of my own experience. If I had 10 years of my life very busy of bishoping and stake presidencies, and then you move or things change, and then you're sort of not in the core of the leadership efforts and the vision making and all those things. And have you gone through those types of seasons?
Welcome to the 80s, by the way. That is really the most difficult part of my life right now, is the fact that, just for instance, my name is still on the door of my boys. 5 of our 8 kids work together in the Ritchie Group. the Ritchie Enterprises when I had it, and there's Ritchie Group now, and they're doing the similar things to what we did, but they're doing it 1,000 times bigger. And even though my name's on the door, they don't call me anymore. I mean, it really is. I mean, I hear about it, and they so on, but I'm not involved really. I'm out of it. I've been retired. I'm outside. You know, in the church, when you get to be 80, you've been all the positions and all the stuff you're doing. They don't really need you anymore. Even yesterday, you know, we watched some of my good friends get released in the 70s quorum and become emeritus, and they're only 70, and I'm in the 80s, and it's really, really hard to have done all that in your life, and now to be kind of registered to the bench
Mm-hmm.
and watch it and think back, and you can write your story. And I've written several books, and it's story of my life and so on. But it is really hard to have been that involved in watching great things happen, and then to be registered to a bystander.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, we still do a lot of ministry, and we do 2 days at the temple and trying to stay active and involved. But it's hard.
Yeah,
it really is hard.
So how do you find purpose, or how do you follow that formula?
That's the only way we are. We have
Yeah.
to we have to create it now. Being a patron of the temple, we did 30 ordinances day before yesterday. Day before conference, and we kind of get a joke about beat that record. You know, we did that in 3 hours. You know, give us, and so we kind of tried our kids. You know, see if you can beat that record. So we're trying to find a motivation, and we find great joy in the temple, and we find great joy in ministry. And we have several restaurant friends of ours that are struggling really hard, and we visit them every week and take them out to dinner and do some things. But so we're trying to have meaning. We're trying to be useful. We're trying to find, but it's hard, and it certainly is several levels below what we used to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's hard. And sometimes, as you're saying, it'd be kind of nice to get the other side, because you know the other side, you're going to be back engaged again and back involved, and you don't need to be looking for something to do. He'll have you something to do. So
yeah.
Anyway,
What was it like here in Scotland's getting a temple?
that was exciting. Heber, Scotland,
Yeah.
Roanoke. You know, I
Uh-huh.
mean, Roanoke last time, Scotland this time, Heber 2 times ago. I mean, everywhere
cool.
we've been, you know, and think about it. We've in California, we had the LA temple, and Heber getting the temple now. And in New Zealand, we had the temple in New Zealand. In Hawaii, we had the La'i temple, and now Roanoke's going to get a temple. In Washington, D.C., we had a temple. In New Zealand, in Africa, when we got to Africa, we had one temple in all of Africa, in Johannesburg. We worked there for 2 years. Boarded 122 airplanes out of Johannesburg in 2 years. 26 countries we supervised. Then we get 7 weeks home, we get transferred and asked to go become the MTC president in Ghana. We get to Ghana the weekend they opened the temple, the second temple in Africa. We get to take the first missionaries to the temple in all of West Africa. And now there's 18 temples announced or built in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just exciting to know that everywhere we've been, everywhere we've worked, there's either is or has been or will be a temple, you know. And the Roanoke will have a big reunion if we back there when they have that one. And within Scotland, we ought to go have a reunion in Scotland again when they have that one. So
yeah.
Anyway, it's fun. It really is. The temple is really and the whole conference was focused on that. The temple really is the spot for a person of my kind, a retired person whose years of real leadership are over. And so you're relegated to self-perpetuating something. You got to self-engineer your life right now. If you're going to be useful, you're not going to get asked by the church to do it. So you got to volunteer to do it. And we just got off another mission up on the girls' camp, but just got released. But it's really hard at our age to do anything more than finding the temple and ministering and things of that kind. But they're rewarding, and they're there. And there's unlimited use. You can, if you go inactive, it's your own fault, because there's plenty of opportunity.
Yeah. Now you, I know that you keep in touch with some of your missionaries. I'm sure many people that you've led in the past, just that continue that mentorship. Yeah. I know you send out a letter or an email,
we have an email.
Whatnot.
We got over 1,000 people on our email, and several hundred of those are missionaries and MTC kids. And we literally have friends all over the world. We get emails back from every country we've served in, several a week. from people all over the world, and it is such a great joy to pull up your email list and see there's Eddie Dubay of the 70s Quorum, and just got put in the 7 presidents. And I took him we had him with us. He was one of our seminary institute directors in Zimbabwe and Zambia and Malawi. And now he's a 7 presidents of 70. Yeah. Elder Morrison was one of our teachers in the MTC, come off a mission in Nigeria, came and knocked on her door to be a teacher, became one of her teachers, married our cook.
Oh, really?
Neither one had parents in the church, so we became their parents in the temple. Again, they got married, and we become dear friends ever since. They call us our mom and dad, but to watch that, to see that happen, that he's only 43 years old. He'll be in that role for 30 years.
Yeah,
30 years he'll be in that 70s quorum, if he doesn't become prophet.
Yeah,
and Eddie Dubay and Joseph Satati and Ian Ardern just got released. He took us all over New Zealand. He was our boss in New Zealand for 2 years. It just having those kind of people.
Yeah, those relationships continue
to work with.
Yeah,
they just keep going.
Awesome.
Paul Johnson.
Paul V. Johnson?
Paul. He's the Sunday school president right now. Paul Johnson.
Yeah.
We took him on safari in Africa. I mean, we've become dear friends, and just to see these guys doing their stuff, it's just
it's inspiring.
It's just inspiring. It's so fun to have them think that's those 319 people are our friends, and we Jeff Holland, I got a note from him I'll finish it with Jeff Holland. I went to him ministering one night, the other night before conference, Friday night, and I saw a guy, one of my friends from high school. He's in the rest home, 2 years older, great basketball star of our day. And he told me, I went in his room, and he said, one of the great moments of my life, he said, it was in high school. I was the athletic director. I couldn't play basketball, so I washed their towels for them. And I was on a trip with him when they took on the state championship, and they lost to Dixie, and the Wasatch had had a perfect season. They lost to Dixie, and he was on the bench. Jerry was on the bench moping about getting beat, and a man named Jeff Holland come over, a kid who had played on the other team, come over and shook his hand and said, "Hey, don't worry about that. Wasatch had a great time. They did a great job. Don't cry about it." This kid told me the other night, he said, my greatest bucket list on my list is to someday have Jeff Holland, meet him or talk to him, thank him for what he did for me 70 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I went home and wrote Elder Holland because he's a good friend of ours. My wife's from St. George, and he'd married 3 of our children, and he's followed us all over. I mean, it's been fun being his friend. I wrote him a note, and I told him about Jerry Christensen, and he picked up the phone. Right, Friday night, 10 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And called. Jerry was asleep. He didn't get it. He didn't answer the phone. But he wrote me back a note, Elder Holland did, and said, "I've tried to call him. I'll call him when conference is over. He's probably doing it today." Said, "But I want to thank you for telling me that." And I called Jerry the next morning, Saturday morning. I said, "Jerry, you missed the call." And I said, "Elder Holland called you last night." And he started crying.
Oh, wow.
He just started crying. He was so touched.
That's cool.
Elder Holland would call him on the phone to fill his bucket list before he dies.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. Well, thanks again, Jim. There's so many stories. I mean, I know you've written many of these down, and I'm grateful we could get a snapshot of many of them and learn from your leadership, your mentorship. Last question I have for you is, you reflect back on your life of leadership. How has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
That is the greatest. That's the greatest success story of leadership, is discovering that how fun it is to also follow and watch people who are trying to do what you tried to do and trying to do what you've done, and to see how they do it. And it really is a thrill to be in the rank and file and watch. Right now, my daughter-in-law's brother is our bishop. And he's doing a great job, and he's just sudden to sit in the audience and look at him and realize that his sister is the mother of 5 of my grandkids, and his dad was the stake president of our stake, and then he was a mission president in Michigan. So you know, it just to kind of be in this benches now, watching these kind of people and being part of that kind of team. It really is a thrill to be a follower when you really, because I in fact, just to finish it off, I say, I envy the days when I was there, when I was doing their job, but I look at it today and I say, I'm sure glad I'm not doing it today, because I don't think I could go camping anymore with those kids. I couldn't do those kind of things, but so I'm glad they're doing it, and I'm glad I don't have to do it, but it sure is fun watching them do it, because they're taking my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids and helping them learn how great the gospel is.